The air in Clarence House had always been thick with history, but in the weeks leading up to the coronation, it was thick with tension. For Camilla, the queen consort, this was the moment she had waited for her entire adult life. No longer would she be the other woman in the tabloid headlines or the subject of sideways glances. She was about to be crowned Queen of the United Kingdom, and she was determined that everything would be perfect. The planning of the ceremony had fallen largely on her shoulders. King Charles, despite his meticulous nature, trusted her judgment implicitly. He was focused on the ancient rites and the spiritual significance of the ceremony, while Camilla managed the guest lists, the processions, and the seating arrangements. It was in these fine details that the old wounds of the family often festered, and Camilla was acutely aware of them. She sat at her mahogany desk, a stack of parchment-style cards before her. These were the official rosters, the internal documents that dictated every movement of every royal during the grand spectacle. They specified who walked behind whom, who sat in which carriage, and who stood on which step of the abbey. It was a complex ballet of precedence and protocol. Her eyes scanned the list for the procession inside Westminster Abbey. There was the Archbishop, then the King, then herself. Behind her would come the pages, but it was the section regarding the route back to Buckingham Palace that gave her pause. The position of gold stick-in-waiting, the officer historically responsible for the sovereign's safety, was listed. It was a prestigious and highly visible role, and involving riding on horseback directly behind the gold state coach. Traditionally, this role had been given to the most senior military officer. However, for this historic occasion, it was widely assumed it would go to Princess Anne. Anne, the Princess Royal, was not only the king's beloved sister, but also a seasoned horsewoman and a former Olympian. She was the obvious, crowd-pleasing choice. Camilla had seen the briefing notes suggesting Anne's name for this prominent position. Camilla stared at the name. Anne. Their relationship was a complex tapestry woven with threads of old history and new realities. In the 1970s, a young Princess Anne had dated Andrew Parker Bowles. Andrew was charming and shared Anne's deep love for horses, but that romance eventually fizzled out. Soon after, Andrew married Camilla. Then, of course, and there was the decades-long saga of Camilla and Charles, which had brought so much pain to the family and had, for a time, made Anne's beloved brother a figure of public scorn. Anne, fiercely loyal to the crown and to her late mother's memory, had never fully warmed to Camilla. While the late queen had eventually given her blessing, paving the way for a public reconciliation, Anne remained a traditionalist. To her, Camilla was the queen consort, a support to the sovereign, not a queen in her own right. Camilla knew that if Anne was placed in such a starring role, riding high on her horse, a solitary figure of royal authority behind the golden coach, the narrative the palace was trying to build would be complicated. The press would write about Anne, the dedicated, untarnished royal. They would compare the hard-working Princess Royal to the new queen. It would shift the focus away from the crowning moment. A bold idea, one that had been whispering at the back of her mind for days, suddenly grew louder. What if Anne wasn't on that list? What if the gold stick was a traditional military general, as protocol allowed? It would be cleaner. It would keep the focus solely on the new king and queen. It was a matter of streamlining the event. Her private secretary entered with a cup of tea. Your Majesty, the final roster for the procession is ready for your approval. Shall I send it to the palace for printing? Camilla looked at the list one last time. She picked up a heavy gold-plated pen. With a swift, decisive stroke, she drew a line through Anne's name. In its place, she wrote a note for a senior army officer to fill the role. Yes, she said, her voice calm and steady. Send it. This is the final version. She didn't see it as a slight. She saw it as an edit, a necessary change for the optics of the day. She sealed the envelope, unaware that she had just lit a fuse that would burn all the way to the heart of the royal family. Across London, at St. James's Palace, Princess Anne was going about her own preparations. She had been briefed weeks ago about her role as Gold Stick. She had even been to the Royal Mews to visit the horse she would ride, a magnificent black mare she had named Winston for the day. She had mentally prepared for the long hours of sitting astride a horse in heavy ceremonial uniform, a task she relished as a physical challenge. It was her duty, and she was proud to do it for her brother. Her phone rang. It was her equerry, his voice hesitant. "Ma'am, I've just received a call from the Lord Chamberlain's office. There's been a change to the procession order." Anne looked up from the stack of papers on her desk. "A change?" "Yes, ma'am. Regarding the Gold Stick. It appears the role has been reassigned." The words hung in the air. Anne's expression didn't change, but a familiar coldness settled in her eyes. She was not a woman who showed emotion easily. She had learned decades ago to keep her feelings locked away, a necessary armor for a life lived in the public eye. But inside, the feeling was unmistakable. A deep, profound sting. "Reassigned to whom?" she asked, her voice clipped. "A general from the Household Cavalry, ma'am." "I see." Anne paused. "I'm processing the information. This wasn't a minor adjustment. This was a public removal. The Gold Stick in Waiting was one of the most photographed roles of the entire day. It was a position of honor, and she had been taken out of it without a single conversation, without a word of explanation from her brother or his wife. "Is there any reason given?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "No, ma'am. The official line is that they've decided to adhere to the strict military tradition of the role." Military tradition. Anne almost laughed. She was an admiral of the naval service, a general in the British Army, and an air chief marshal. If they wanted military tradition, she was the embodiment of it. This was not about tradition. This was about ego. She hung up the phone and looked out the window. She could feel the slight as acutely as a physical blow. It was a deliberate act of erasure. For years, she had worked tirelessly for the family, for the crown. She had never complained, never sought the limelight, never written a tell-all book. She had simply done her duty. And now, on the most important day of her brother's reign, she was being shunted aside by a woman who, in her view, was still trying to prove her place. Anne was not one to cause a scene. She would not call the palace and scream. That was not her way. But she would not forget this. The line had been drawn, and when she next saw her brother, he would know exactly how she felt. She quietly informed her staff that she would, of course, still attend the coronation and fulfill her other duties. But the warmth she had tried to cultivate for Camilla over the years froze over in an instant. Prince Charles, soon to be king, was oblivious to the brewing storm. He was in his study, practicing the intonations of the coronation oath, when a member of his private staff knocked and entered. They carried a leather-bound folder containing the final ceremonial program that had been sent to the printers. "Sir, I thought you should review the final procession order before it goes to the press," the aide said, placing it on the desk. Charles nodded, putting down his notes. He was in a good mood, a rare moment of calm before the coming storm. He opened the folder and began scanning the pages. The order of service was beautiful. The music selections were perfect. He smiled. Then he turned to the page detailing the return procession. As he saw the gold state coach, flanked by the yeomen of the guard, he saw the route map, and then he saw the notation for the Gold Stick in Waiting. It listed a name he didn't recognize, a military general. He frowned, rereading the line. He looked at the list of the procession behind the carriage. His sister's name was nowhere to be found. He flipped back a page, thinking he had missed her. He scanned the list of those walking in the abbey. Anne was there, as a crown bearer. But the horseback role, the visible, powerful role, was gone. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low. "Sir?" He pointed to the page, his finger trembling slightly. "The gold stick. Where is the Princess Royal?" The aide leaned in. "I believe the final roster was approved by the Queen's office, sir." The decision was made to revert to a purely military appointee for the role. Charles felt a wave of heat rush to his face. The blood pounded in his ears. This was not a mere logistical error. This was a profound insult to his sister. Anne was not just a royal, she was his champion. She was the one person in the family who had never wavered in her support, who had never let him down. She had endured the media circus of his divorce, the fallout of the Andrew Parker Bowles connection, and the public's initial hatred of Camilla, all with a stoic silence. She had been the rock upon which the family's reputation was built during the darkest days. And now, his wife, without consulting him, had removed her from one of the highest honors of the day. He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Hey, get Camilla on the phone," he ordered, his voice now an icy calm that was far more frightening than a shout. "Now!" When Camilla entered the room, she was met with a silence that was deafening. Charles stood by the window, his back to her. On the desk lay the open folder with the ceremonial roster. "Charles? Is everything all right?" she asked, though she knew it wasn't. He turned slowly. His face was pale, his eyes blazing with a fury she had rarely seen directed at her. "No, Camilla. Everything is not all right." He gestured to the papers. "Can you explain this?" Camilla walked to the desk and glanced at the page. She had expected this conversation eventually, but not the raw anger emanating from her husband. "It's the procession order," she said carefully. "We discussed streamlining the visuals, and having a military figure there reinforces the—" "We discussed nothing of the sort!" Charles's voice rose, echoing off the walls. "You made a decision about my family, about my sister, without a single word to me." Camilla straightened her back. "I am trying to manage the optics of our coronation, Charles. You know what the press says. They will compare you and me to Anne. They will paint a picture of a divided family. They will paint a picture of a divided family because you are dividing it," he shot back. He took a deep breath, trying to control his emotions. "Anne has stood by me for 70 years. She stood by me when I married Diana. She stood by me when the world hated us. She is the only person in this family who has never, ever asked for anything in return. And this is how you repay her? By erasing her on the biggest day of my life?" Camilla was taken aback by the depth of his pain. "I didn't erase her. She's still in the Abbey service. She's still part of the day." Charles shook his head in disbelief. "You don't understand, do you? The gold stick is an honor. It's a position of trust. It's saying, I trust you with my life, and you have given it to a stranger." He walked towards her, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You need to fix this. Call the printers. Stop the presses. Put her name back." Camilla met his gaze. The silence between them was a chasm. She saw the hurt in his eyes, the deep, abiding love for his sister, but she also saw a challenge to her own authority. If she backed down now, would she ever truly be queen? Or would she always be second-guessing, always deferring to the real royals like Anne? "It's too late," she said quietly. "The programs are at the printers. The invitations have been sent. Changing it now would cause a media storm about indecision." "I don't care about the media storm," Charles roared, finally losing his temper. "I care about my sister. I care about doing the right thing." He paced the room, running his hands through his hair. The weight of the crown was already heavy, and he hadn't even placed it on his head yet. He thought about Anne, about her quiet dignity. He knew she would never complain. She would simply absorb the blow and carry on. That was who she was, and that was precisely why she deserved better. "Then I will call her myself," Charles said, his voice hardening with resolve. "I will tell her that this was a mistake, that it was not my wish." Camilla felt a flicker of fear, and the thought of Charles publicly contradicting her, of admitting her oversight, was a humiliation she couldn't bear. "Charles, please, don't make this into a public family feud. We can explain it to Anne privately. She'll understand." "She won't understand," Charles said, reaching for the phone, "and I don't expect her to." The phone rang at St. James's Palace. Anne picked it up, already knowing who it would be. "Charles." "Lottie," he said, using his childhood nickname for her. His voice was heavy. "I know about the roster. I am so sorry. I didn't know. I would never have allowed this." Anne was silent for a moment. She heard the genuine remorse in his voice. She knew her brother. She knew he loved her. But she also knew that he was now married to a woman who saw her as a threat. "I know you wouldn't have, Charles," she said finally, and her voice calm but distant. "I've told Camilla to reverse it, to put your name back." "It's too late for that," Anne said. "The public narrative is already set. If it changes now, it looks like chaos, and the monarchy cannot look chaotic." "But I can't let them do this to you?" Anne sighed. This was the burden of being the one who held things together. "You can, and you will. I will do my duty, Charles. I will be there. I will stand where I am told. I will not cause a scene." She paused, the next words costing her more than she would ever admit. "But do not ask me to pretend that this didn't happen. The trust, it's been damaged." The call ended. Charles sat in the darkness of his study, the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had won the argument with his wife, but he had lost something far more precious, the unspoken, an unwavering trust of his sister. And for the first time, he wondered if the crown he was about to receive was worth the price his family was already paying. The day of the coronation dawned gray but bright. The crowds were massive. The pomp was glorious. Inside Westminster Abbey, the ceremony proceeded with ancient, solemn grace. Charles was crowned king. Camilla was crowned queen beside him. The congregation sang, "God Save the King." In the procession, the gold state coach rolled through the streets, pulled by 8 Windsor Greys. Behind it, riding tall and proud on a magnificent horse, was a senior army general in full regalia, the gold stick in waiting. Camilla, inside the coach, waved to the crowds, her smile radiant. But Anne was not in the coach. She was not on a horse. She was further back in the procession, doing her duty, such as she had promised. As the cameras flashed, they captured the image of the new queen, but they also caught glimpses of the Princess Royal, her face a mask of stoic professionalism. That evening, at the family dinner, the atmosphere was polite but glacial. Charles tried to bridge the gap, making small talk about the service. Camilla, elegant and gracious, thanked everyone for their support. Anne responded with curt nods and one-word answers. She was not rude, she was simply absent. The warmth she had once shown was gone, replaced by a fortress of ice. Charles watched his wife and his sister exist in the same room without truly connecting. He knew that Camilla, in her quest to solidify her position, had created a rift that might never fully heal. The deletion of a name on a piece of paper had cost him his sister's trust. And as he looked at the two most important women in his life, he realized that being king meant ruling over a family that was now, in some fundamental way, broken. The ceremony was over. The crown was on his head, but the true cost of the day was only just beginning to be counted. Months passed. The summer turned to autumn. The royal family carried out their engagements with their usual efficiency. But the incident of the coronation roster was never far from the surface. For Camilla, it had been a miscalculation. For Anne, it was a confirmation of her suspicions. For Charles, it was a constant nagging pain. One afternoon, an event was scheduled at the University of London. It was a Foundation Day ceremony, a relatively low-key affair in the grand scheme of royal duties. But for the first time since the coronation, Camilla and Anne were scheduled to appear together, alone, for a joint engagement. The tension in the palace offices was palpable. How would they interact? Would there be a scene? Would the cameras capture a frosty silence? The venue was the Senate House, a grand Art Deco building. Camilla arrived first, her car pulling up to the entrance. She was there to receive an honorary doctorate of literature, a fitting tribute to her work, promoting reading through her Reading Room initiative. Anne, as the chancellor of the university, would be the one to present the award. As Camilla waited in the marble hallway, she felt a flutter of nerves. She had spent months thinking about how to handle this. She knew she had to try and build a bridge. Her relationship with Anne was not just a personal matter, it was a matter of state. Our divided royal family was a gift to the tabloids. Anne arrived, walking with her characteristic brisk, no-nonsense stride. She was dressed in a simple but elegant coat, her expression unreadable. She approached Camilla and gave a small, formal nod. "Camilla," Anne said. "Anne," Camilla replied. "Thank you for hosting this today." They began to walk towards the hall where the ceremony would take place. They reached a large set of double doors. Protocol dictated a strict order of precedence. As queen, Camilla was entitled to enter first. However, in a gesture of goodwill, of humility, Camilla stopped and stepped aside. "Please," Camilla said softly, gesturing towards the door. "After you." It was a peace offering. A public acknowledgement of Anne's seniority in terms of service, if not in title. It was Camilla's way of saying, I see you. I respect you. I was wrong." The waiting staff and officials held their breath. They watched the two women. Anne looked at the door, then at Camilla. For a split second, her expression flickered. Was that surprise? Gratitude? The hint of a thaw? Then Anne did something unexpected. She smiled. It was a small, tight smile, but it was genuine. However, instead of walking through, she shook her head slightly and gestured back to Camilla. "No," Anne said, her voice firm but not unkind. "You are the queen. You go first. Protocol is protocol." She politely refused the offer, but there was a warmth in her refusal that hadn't been there before. It was a signal. "I appreciate the gesture, but we do things properly. We follow the rules. And the rules say, you are the queen." It was Anne's way of accepting the apology without making a scene. Camilla understood. She nodded, accepting the subtle reconciliation. She walked through the doors, with Anne falling in step just behind her. Throughout the ceremony, the thaw continued. When it was time to bestow the honorary degree, Anne placed the ceremonial hood over Camilla's shoulders. As she did so, she leaned in slightly. The official photographer captured the moment. Camilla kneeling, her eyes downcast, and Anne standing over her, adjusting the hood. But on Anne's face was not the stern mask of duty. It was a genuine, almost fond smile. Later, they posed for pictures together. Camilla held her diploma, beaming. Anne stood beside her, and for the first time in months, she looked relaxed. The ice was not completely gone. It would take years to fully melt, If it ever did, but it was cracking. Camilla had tried to erase Anne, and it had backfired spectacularly, causing a rift with her husband and a cold war with his sister. But in this quiet university hall, through a simple gesture of yielding, she had begun the long process of repair. Anne had stood her ground, defended her principles, and in doing so, had earned the right to be treated as an equal, not as a subject to be managed. As they left the building together, walking side by side towards their waiting cars, a photographer called out, "Your Majesty! Princess Anne! Over here!" They both turned, and for the first time since the coronation, they were photographed laughing together at a shared comment about the weather. The picture made the front pages the next day. The headline read, "Peace in the Palace? Anne and Camilla's Thaw." Charles, seeing the paper at breakfast, felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He looked at his wife, who was quietly sipping her tea. She caught his eye and gave him a small, knowing smile. She had tried to erase Anne, and it had almost broken his heart. But now, she had found a different way. She had learned that being queen wasn't about erasing the past, but about making peace with it. And in that moment, the family, fractured by a single deleted name, finally began to heal.